room's grand entrance as I try to get to West Hollywood right after this. So anyway, thank you for helping me optimize my schedule. So today I'm going to talk about some diversity. Okay, first off, how many people are either in a data science team or work very closely with one? All right. How many people think that that team needs to have more diversity? All right. That's why we are here. So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with Joss Whedon, but Joss Whedon, who is a director and really famous for things like Buffy and Dollhouse and The Avengers, has this famous quote, and he was asked by a reporter, like, why do you keep writing strong female characters? And his response to that was, because you are still asking me that question. So why give a talk on diversity? Quite simply because we don't have enough of it, and it seems like that's the sentiment here in this room. And I wanted to give a talk about diversity in our field of data science because there's just so much to be gained by having diversity and having it in our teams, but there is a stunning lack of it, except for this room, by the way. This room is great right now. And so the only way, so everybody acknowledges that this is a problem, we want to do something about it, and that's the way that we get started. This is still a problem, so let's do something about it. And for this 30 minutes that we have together, I'd like to share some of my own experiences and lessons learned in growing and working with diverse data science teams, and hopefully spark some interesting conversations about how we, as a wider community, can do better. So, diversity is not important, nice to have, or essential. I would argue that it's essential. So there's lots of studies out there that talk about that having diversity is a good thing. There was a study done by McKinsey that studied diversity relative to the success of a company based off of both the diversity of the organization as well as their leadership. And one interesting fact about it was that every 10% increase in racial and ethnic diversity in the senior executive team was correlated with an EBIT rise of 0.8%. It's crazy, right? There was another interesting article I read from the Harvard Business Review that did a study on leaders on both their inherent traits, so traits that you were born with, as well as acquired traits, so things that you gain from experience, and found with diversity in both of those that they saw things like 45% more likely to report a growth in market share and 70% more likely to report a capture of a new market. All right, so those are great stats. These are ultimately a good thing. So why, if everybody agrees that it's a good thing, does it seem that in my experience that it's still a nice to have, right? It's not something that people think immediately. So how many people who are managers or people who are in a position to hire a team think of it as advantageous? Okay, if I have a more diverse team, there are things to be gained for that. And in fact, it's something that it's essential. So if you want to seriously reap the benefits of having a diverse team, I think that the first thing we need to do is change how we think about it and change how we prioritize. So every individual exists in a multi-dimensional feature space. Tiny bit of math. We are at a data science conference. Tiny bit of math. So every individual, everybody here in this room, will identify with some value for each of those different things. So when we think about diversity, often we talk about gender diversity or ethnic diversity, but literally there's diversity in every single one of those, on one of these traits and more. And so when we think about hiring for diversity, it's not just along any one of these things. And typically, when we think about hiring, it's actually all about the acquired traits that we have. We look for people's education, for their work history, for their proficiency, and their abilities to some extent, all of these things that you gain over time. However, many of the traits that are up there and contribute to who you are is something that's inherent. It's your age, your gender, the language, your culture, etc. There's this concept of intersectionality. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of that, which states that an individual's life and the challenges that they have are informed by several factors. And you can't just pick one of those things out. So when we see a lack of diversity in a team or in an industry, it's typically not just because there's uniformity in one factor. It's really across several. So has everybody ever heard about the Dave rule? That if you have diversity, as long as you have enough women as their Daves in the room. So I certainly have been in lots of meetings and teams and companies where I will walk in a room and I'm the only female, or maybe one of a few, so I've definitely been outnumbered by Daves and Mikes, Chris's, and Ian's, and so, and it goes on and on. But the point is, when I think about that Dave, who that Dave is, it's not simply because they share a name. I'm outnumbered by, as a woman, I'm outnumbered by that type. There's a person who's probably a Caucasian male named Dave. And so the field of data science is still emergent. It's still very new. And we have the opportunity to change what the field of the people literally look like. And so I think what we should be thinking about is like striving for diversity across both the acquired and inherent traits. So academic backgrounds, the education levels, the areas of study, the industry experience, how long have people been in the industry, what vertical they come from, languages you speak or program, depending on who you argue with. And then, of course, all of the inherent traits as well. So age, gender, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic backgrounds, life stages, sexual orientations, all of those things have diversity. Take a look at the three individuals here. Would you say that simply based on appearances, that one of these people is more likely to be a data scientist than the other two? Probably. I know that everybody in their head is probably there's one of them, but I won't call anybody out. So do you know a data scientist who looks like somebody in each of these things? I bet you do, actually. So which one would you hire, do you think? So let me give you some hypothetical backgrounds for three people who may or may not look like this. A physicist with a PhD who's been in academia for 10 years and has decided that they want to make a switch and actually make some money and become a data scientist. Or someone who has 5 years industry experience but hopped around as a business analyst, a researcher, an engineer, and has a degree in computer science. Or somebody who went off the beaten path, somebody who didn't graduate from college until they were in their mid to late 20s, and then has been in data science, data engineering, been a consultant ever since. Which one of those sounds like a data scientist to you? I know. It should be all of the above, by the way. It should be all of the above. I have interviewed, helped hire, and worked alongside people who fit these types of profiles and several others that I didn't mention here. And each one of them brings something different and valuable to the table because of both their personal and professional experiences. So because, again, we're still so new a field, you don't often come across or hire people who have 10 plus years data science experience. Like, you see those requirements on LinkedIn sometimes, you're like, that didn't exist, right? Like, there's no way you're gonna hire that. Or like, it must have it. Nobody hires a whole team of data scientists just from a data science program. It just programs have not been around that long. So what you do instead is search for people with the raw skills and experiences to be the type of data scientist that you need for your organization. So why is diversity worthwhile for data science in particular? I think it adds new perspectives, different approaches, and fosters some healthy conflict. And I found that data science works best as a team sport and not as an individual event. So Phil Jackson said in one of his books, to achieve greatness, you must rely on the good offices of others. In a lot of ways, also, data science is an art. So if I posed a question in this room, if I suddenly were on a hackathon and I said, hey, who can make the best model to predict the weather? Or better, we're in LA, predict the traffic. I will likely come up with one different answer for every single person in this room. Right? So if you pose it to a group of data scientists, so a data scientist with a background in mathematics or statistics will probably start and want to use different algorithms than a data scientist with a machine learning or an AI background. A data scientist with an academic background, once they start writing their solution, their code will probably write their code differently than a data scientist who started their career as an engineer. A data scientist with experience using petabytes of data that tends to be very sparse will have different ideas of what they want to use as feature spaces and individual features than somebody who's worked on small but robust data sets. And people with different inherent traits will potentially pick different approaches and look at the problem differently as an aspect of problem solving. GenderMag recently did a study that showed that how people use software and problem solve can correspond to their gender. And I found that fascinating, and it made me wonder if we did something similar for data science, would we find that same pattern? Do people, depending on who they are, problem solve differently? Do you tinker more, depending on who you are? And And so I have been very fortunate to have worked alongside many intelligent and collaborative people. And I found that the ones who have pushed me to grow the most are those with totally different perspectives and experiences than I do. When we approach these problems together, when we approach problems together with people who are very different than we are, it can produce a healthy level of conflict. You don't want to only work with people who agree with you all the time. You might like it at first, but trust me, it's not. There's better things. Data scientists who can challenge each other to consider other perspectives and to build better solutions together ultimately become better data scientists. So I want to talk about not just, so we talked about the benefits of having diversity for data scientists and for the models that they're building, but I wanted to also take it a step higher about the products that ultimately data scientists build. So I don't have, disclaimer, I have no information about what happened with the product here on the left. But I took this product as a warning of what might happen if you don't have diversity. So just in case we don't know what's happening here, so there's this cool floaty on the left that got tweeted out and said, you know, this could have been avoided because, quite frankly, the major unappealing flaw of this floaty is the fact that it looks like a giant sanitary napkin. Nobody wants to sit on a giant feminine product, especially this woman in the picture, right? Like, I don't think that's what she wants to do with her time. And it made me wonder, like, okay, before it hit the shelves and went viral as a mistake on Twitter, how many people had to touch this product? Somebody had to come up with this and design it, and it had to be manufactured and QA'd, and maybe they tested it. But so how many people touched this product and didn't once break this up? So it made you wonder, like, is there, one, a company that has 0 women made this, or two, they did not think to test, or they tested and didn't involve women at all, or maybe they had women who told them, like, this is a dumb idea, and their feedback was ignored, or they managed to have a sample of women so small and that were like, that's great, I would totally buy that. Like, I don't know, right? But the problem is here is that the company learned too late in their design that there was a problem, and it could have been mitigated, right?
Or
so,
with more clueful men.
Hopefully. Or, right, so maybe they involve women or men who are a little bit more empathetic to other people, other genders. So the example on the right is not as humorous. So those are crash test dummies. And until recently, for 30 years, the only crash test dummies that were used in reports by the government to convince you whether or not to buy a car were male dummies. So there were no reports until very recently that would help me determine as a woman whether or not the car I was driving was safe. So, and quite frankly, I think they found it's actually less safe to be a female driver than it is to be a male driver, because statistically women have different body types than men do. This is changing, thankfully, over the past few years. So this is a picture from an article that I think, or press release or news from Ford, that they were changing the type of dummies that they were using to more accurately reflect what the average American looks like. One of the interesting things that was mentioned in the article is also that the woman dummy that they were using before was under 5 feet and 100 pounds to represent the average woman. While that helps me, it's great. It's probably not accurately going to reflect the American population, the women who are around 5'4", 5'5". So in this case, the diversity, now that they're starting to add it to the product, reflects the diversity that we has as a population, and ultimately ends up saving lives. This is great. And taking it one motivation step even higher is like, why should this matter? Right? Like, if you want to give concrete reasons to any organization or at the top level, like, we should really care about diversity, is that it can affect your bottom line. So this was again from the McKinsey study that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, where they studied companies in different quartiles of the types of diversity that they had. And the ones that were at the top quartile in diversity are significantly more likely to financially outperform those who are at the bottom quartile. So they have a few stats, like 15% more likely to outperform if you're more diverse for gender, and ethnically diverse, and that's what I thought was really interesting, is 35% more likely to outperform. So there's a great study the McKinsey diversity database. So how do we get there? So I wanted to leave you with some tips, which was just from lessons learned in my experience. So hiring tip number 1, take a look at the data. I'm a data scientist, we're data scientists here, and I've got to use our own techniques. So start collecting and analyzing the data at each step of your process. So it's at the top. Is the top of the recruiting funnel diverse? Is there a lack of diversity there? Because if you take a look, if everybody at the top of your funnel, your initial recruits, all look the same, there is nothing you can do after that in your hiring process that will make your team more diverse. So assuming that you have diversity at the top of your funnel, and then even all the way down to your offers, if you don't have diversity there, you should ask yourself a question. Like, why is that? Is it really that that those people tend to be more talented or a better fit for your team? Or is there a bias in the way you're interviewing them? Assuming that you have diversity in the people who you give offers to, is there diversity in people who actually accept and join your team? And if not, is there a bias there? Is there something that you're potentially inadvertently doing that other types of people are not deciding to join your company? So use your data to find really precise things that need to be fixed and can be fixed. Hiring tip number 2, consider a candidate's ad in addition to their fit. So first of all, new team members to any team should absolutely fit into the culture of their team. I'm not saying that that's not true. What I'm suggesting is to spend more time focusing on what that candidate will add to the team as well. And not just add as themselves as an individual, but what they bring out in everybody else. When you add this new person to a team, they should increase the team's collective potential by adding new perspectives and skills to the team. And when I think of the team members that I've worked with in the past, I can rattle off a list of the things that they were probably hired for and the required traits. Like, oh, we need somebody who's an expert in Spark, or we need somebody who's an expert in NLP. But when I think of these colleagues and what they really brought to the table, was it really that one thing that they were trying to check off on the resume, or was it something else? I think of the person who was an expert in building tools, and all the tools that they built made our team so much more productive. I think of the person who was a fantastic storyteller, and so pushed us to really find what was compelling about the models we were doing and how to get people to start adopting them. Or even, I think of one of my favorite colleagues, and she's such an expert collaborator that everybody who worked with her just enjoyed working with her. She brought the best out of them, and that's something so intangible, but was so, so valuable for our team. Hiring tip number 3, be patient. There is no one particular group, age, gender, race, etc., that has a monopoly on talent. So data scientists are certainly hard to find, and while it may take us some time to get diversity at the top of the funnel, like we were saying earlier, it will be tempting to just hire the first person who can pass all your criteria. Right? But the problem with trying to move quickly is that you may incur a diversity debt. Anybody familiar with the term diversity debt? All right. But what this is, if you're not aware, is a concept in organizational design which says if you ignore diversity and decisions about culture in the short term because you're optimizing instead for what you need, you're going to be paying for that later on. A great example of this is Uber. Yeah, there's a couple of quotes there that they had so much diversity that billions and billions of dollars could not dig them out of it. So, but take as an example of this being patient about the startups that you know. I know a lot of startups where the entire team is all male. At what point do those startups decide, if they decide this at all, that they would benefit from some gender diversity? When the company is how big? 10 people? 20? 50? If you were a woman candidate interviewing for that company that has no other women, would you be comfortable joining knowing that you were the first woman? Knowing, like, who's watched Hidden Figures? But would you be comfortable knowing that you're the only woman out of 10? Would you be, well, or one of 50, or one of 100 if you were the only woman, knowing that you were going to be facing that kind of conflict, or not conflict, but that you're the odd one out from the beginning? Would you be more likely to join that company if there were more women, if there was already other women there? I would, certainly. So do you really want to have a diversity debt problem, or diversity debt for so long that it becomes that insurmountable problem? Probably not. So be patient early, and we'll pay dividends later on. My last hiring tip is to be willing to take a risk on a non-standard candidate. So data scientists, job postings, again, have a laundry list of all of these different skills that we all need, including algorithms, like down to the algorithm, like you need to know this algorithm. And we're called unicorns for a reason, right? There's that joke, because like every time you look, there's, how are you gonna find these people? And the ones who can check, like the majority of the lists are so rare to find, they probably are unicorns, like as their side job other than being a data scientist. I would consider myself a non-standard data scientist candidate when I started. I don't have a PhD. I didn't study machine learning, artificial intelligence, computer science. I didn't really learn how to code in school. And I consider myself very lucky that in my first job in the industry 10 years ago, my boss recognized my potential and my eagerness to learn and hired me onto his team. I learned how to code. I learned about technology. I learned a bunch of different machine learning algorithms, and I have thoroughly enjoyed being in data science and analytics for the past 10 years. And I've learned that in trying to pay that forward, it has led me into hiring folks who bring scrappiness and drive and really interesting perspectives to a wider team. And if a person is smart and teachable and interesting, it may be a better value add to your team than somebody with all the right buzzwords and playing buzzword bingo on their resume. So some challenges. So when you need to fill an open position on your team, the criteria for that hire is usually an acquired trait or some specific skill. So take, for example, let's say that we're trying to hire someone who's an underwater basket weaving expert. Okay? And said, who would you rather hire? So person one, you have an expert underwater basket weaver, they wrote a book about it, they've been doing this for 10 years, but they're in the exact same demographic as everybody else on your team. Or you find somebody who's a pretty good underwater basket weaver, spent 3 to 5 years doing that, but completely different profile, different gender, different age group, et cetera, as the rest of your team. If you're solely focused on whether or not somebody's a really good underwater basket weaver, most companies would hire that first person. They say, this is the best person for this job, because I need this particular skill. But every time you do that, you're ignoring the bigger picture. I would suggest trying to make a case for why the inherent traits have their weight. So challenge 2. So people may not have actually had experience working in a diverse team. They may be doing this for the very first time. I remember going to college and having some friends who had literally never had classes with people of the other gender. They went from kindergarten all the way through high school in either all girls or all middle school. And so college, like freshman year, like, what is going on? In addition to college being, a thing, like, what is going on? And that conflict and that growth that they had to go through is the same thing that I've seen, honestly, with some of my team members. Like, they are not used to working in diverse teams. And like, I once worked in a team with some men who had never worked with a woman before, so they would say things to me that I would consider offensive or maybe sexist. But it was never from a place from malice, I hope, that they weren't just trying to be a jerk on purpose. But it was teachable moments for all of us. So people may not know how to act around people who are different than they are, and that's okay. It just takes time. Challenge 3, so there's healthy and there's unhealthy levels of conflict. So when you have a bunch of really smart people with different opinions discussing a topic, it can be really great and discuss lots of learning and lots of interest, lots of discussions. However, if those discussions happen without any empathy, then people just start fighting, right? And so it can quickly learn to argument and fighting and backstabbing. And some people really thrive off of confrontation. I don't. So just be aware that there may be friction points in your team. And address those arguments as soon as you see that happening. And the final challenge is making sure all voices are heard. So it defeats the purpose. Well, congratulations, you have a diverse team. If all the opinions that are voiced and being listened to are coming from one person or one particular group of people. So be mindful that it's not the loudest or most vocal person who always makes group decisions. So always encourage everybody to speak up and let them know that their opinion matters. So it's one thing to get diversity. Making sure everyone feels like they're heard and included is one way to retain it. So some final thoughts. The benefits of diversity are real and quantifiable. I mentioned a couple studies. I found study after study about how this is beneficial and all the gains that there are of it, and that it would bring to a team and a company. So the hype is real. 2, be proactive about diversity. Think about diversity even when your teams are small. Take steps to be proactive instead of reactive, and beware of diversity debts. And finally, teams are like plants, so they need nurturing even after they've sprouted. That's my time. Thank you very much.
So we have a few minutes of Q&A.
Thank you for that. It's really good to hear the diversity question being addressed here. I'm wondering if you have any success stories or ideas about how to get companies to actually care about diversity, because oftentimes it's the people who are underrepresented in technology who are the ones who care about it. And as a woman in tech, it can be an uphill struggle if you're working in a company that's all male, even just to prove yourself and prove that you're as good as them. So it's even more challenging to get them to actually listen to concerns about diversity. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so one of the things I've seen is there's a lot of diversity and inclusion grassroots efforts in various companies. And so that's one avenue, I think, to get that started. The other is finding, so here's the thing, I know you mentioned like the minorities are the ones that feel the pain the most. Sometimes it's finding the right advocate internally who is not a minority, or somebody who the advocate has the power to do something about it. Just because you're not a minority, it doesn't mean that you don't acknowledge that the problem and don't want to do something about it.
Can you talk about, great talk today, thank you for coming. Can you talk about diversity goals for small teams? If you have a team of 5, 10, 15, 20, are there some ways that you can look around your team and feel confident that you have a diversity perspective, both inherent and acquired traits?
Right. So the first thing I would do is, so 5 is a small number. But again, like, do you have, like, I think you can go through like the top categories of those acquired and inherent traits and just ask yourself, like, do I have gender diversity? Do I have age diversity? Do I have this? And do you think that is this posing a problem? At what point is that painful? Like, if you have 5 people, you know them fairly well, and you'll be able to take a good look and say, like, what would be an interesting litmus test would be like, if this job and team didn't exist, would these people be friends? Like, would they know each other? Would they have actually like crossed each other's paths?
What answer do you want there, yes or no?
Huh? I would, it's funny, I once looked around my team and thought, like, man, we were diverse enough that we could go into Vegas and totally play like 21. Like, they would never suspect that we know each other. And so I guess would be like, no.
Okay.
But that's not to say that they wouldn't be friends. That's why I want to be like,
Hi.
Hi.
Nice talk. This is one of my concerns, one of my problems. I go out and I put out a job posting, and then I go actively looking for places that train women or train minorities in order to fill out posting. I tried to hire 2 JavaScript developers last year. I got nothing but white male candidates. I got 1 or 2 non-white male candidates, and honestly, they just weren't qualified. Like, just you take everything else off the resume, they just weren't as qualified. Now that speaks to 2 problems. But have you seen efforts to provide better training, more emphatic training, high quality training to a quote more diverse crowd? Because I'd love to hire non-white guys. I'm sick of looking at myself all day.
There is, I don't remember if it's a website or a service that you can put job descriptions through and actually see whether or not there's gender bias within the job descriptions. But that's one, and I know that there's some studies about how to post job descriptions in different places such that you can attract different candidates. So that's one thing that I think might be able to address the problem. The other problem is like we need to get more diverse candidates or more diverse people into those fields is a much bigger problem.
So this is our last question.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of metrics as well in diversity? Because a lot of times a company has 5 white guys from Harvard, and so they hire a black woman from Howard, but then the standards that she's held, isn't given the freedom to bring diversity of thought because of the metrics the company uses to evaluate performance. And so she trains herself to just start behaving like a white guy from Harvard, and then they lose all the value of that diversity.
So I'm not sure what is the question. How are companies trying to stay accountable?
Well, what can a company do to make sure that they are getting the diversity that they're hiring for?
I think that has to come down to the team level of really understanding what's going on in your team. Like, are they actually? Because I think at a high level, it'd be hard for a company to know because they're just looking at the numbers. Like, hey, we hired a woman, fantastic. We doubled our female population. We have 3 now, 4 now, right? And that's all that they see. But we're really jealous is understanding are you forcing the women to just become that one proto persona? But I think we're out of time. But thank you very much for your questions.